Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a fantastic show for you this evening. The amazing Corkey Fornof is here with us, and we are going to talk all about lessons learned, some flying tips, things like that from his amazing career. Before we get started, just a few things. First of all, we, coming into the new year, have another winner in our Fly to Win challenge. Brian Green of Grand Haven, Michigan, has won a Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset. Be sure to go and check out the SocialFlight.com and the SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices. All you need to do is get this and go check in anywhere. We're giving more prizes away. It just keeps going and going. I love to give things away. It's a lot of fun. So be sure to go and do that. It's completely free, and you actually have a really great chance at winning by just getting out there and participating. Also, the SocialFlight Live podcast is now available with recordings of all our shows on your favorite device. Just go wherever you get your podcast services, do a search on one word, SocialFlight, and bring us up, subscribe. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel. I really appreciate it. Keeps all of this going for all of you. And lastly, SocialFlight's FAA learning system is in high gear right now. You can go to SocialFlight and completely for free on your schedule, on your time, you can take courses, watch videos, and be able to get wings credits. If you're a mechanic, you can get aviation maintenance technician credits towards that awards program. And if you're an A&P with an inspection authorization, an IA, then you can actually get your renewal education, which is due by the end of March of this year. You can get that education through SocialFlight, again, on your time. You watch a course, you learn from it, you answer a quiz at the end, and you get a certificate printed out and credit with the FAA that you use towards your 8 hours of required education. So be sure to check all of that out. It's just a great utility, and we're seeing just hundreds and hundreds of people using it constantly. And I love that, because they're all getting this great education, and our partnership with the FAA just grows stronger and stronger. Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by Tempest Aero, one of my best kind of friends in the industry, with their oil filters, their spark plugs, their tools, vacuum pumps, etc. You know, this has been a very difficult time when it comes to aircraft components and supply chain. And it has been wonderful to see a company do so well through this in keeping all of us supplied with spark plugs, oil filters, all the things that we need. They do air filters now. And also, Tempest Aero isn't just those parts that we think of when we think of Tempest, but it is also, there are other companies of Alcor and Stratus, Marvel Schebler, and fuel control systems with Precision Aeromotive and Consolidated Fuel Systems. So big thanks to them, and be sure, if you talk to any of them, to mention us here at SocialFlight. We're so grateful for their support. Now, on to tonight's guest, the legendary Corkey Fornof, Hollywood's stunt pilot. J.W. Corkey Fornof has captivated audiences at air shows and on the big screen for over 50 years. He has logged over 17,000 hours in over 300 different types of aircraft. Think about that, 300 different types of aircraft. He has, in that time, he has flown over 3,000 low-level aerial performances in 9 types of aircraft, including the T-6 Texan, the P51 Mustang, the F8F Bearcat, the Pitts Special, the Bellanca Super Viking, the Christen Eagle, and the world's most famous microjet, the BD-5J, which he piloted on the iconic James Bond 007 series. What you may not know is that Corkey is also one of the most experienced pilots on the planet when it comes to managing emergencies. And Corkey is here tonight to share just a little of that experience with us, as well as some lessons learned that just may save a life or two for the rest of us flying in the general aviation world with the sunny side up, at least hopefully most of the time. So buckle up and please help me welcome to SocialFlight Live, as I bring him on the line now, Corkey Fornof. How are you doing, Corkey?
Hey, how's it going, Jeff? Welcome to my model shop.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And yeah, have people take a look at this. How amazing is this, that this is your little shop with countless models all over the
Yeah,
place. What's the
yeah, I
story
come
here?
out
Before
here
we
and
get going on how to keep things from crashing, what's the story with this shop?
well, I build scale models as a hobby. And I like to build particularly a lot of the ones we've used in movies. And I've been doing it since I was 10. I've got some that I built when I was 10 years old. And it's just, keeps my hands busy. I come out here to write my stories. I hope to get a book going, or actually, I'm looking to start a video blog, and something like streaming and tell those stories. Because, when we talk about them here, I can only hit some of the high points. You can't go into the details of what made things happen or why, because they're really about people, places, and things that I've experienced. It's not just me. I didn't make it. It's all the people, places, and things combined that made my story.
I'm glad that you're doing that because I think having an oral history basically of general aviation and of aviation as a whole is so important to us with so many legendary people kind of coming and going throughout history, and we need to capture all of that amazing knowledge. And gosh, there's so much of it stuck in your head, man. My friend, we need to get that down where we can read it and read it.
Well, Jeff, I've been very privileged. I rode into the industry on my father and Bob Hoover's coattails. And Bob was a close friend of my dad's and took an interest in me. And if it hadn't been for he and my dad, I'd have killed myself in the 51. Because as a young pilot, you do some stupid things and you want to try and eliminate that. And hopefully, some of these stories, somebody can pick up and say, gee, I know somebody that's been there, you know. But probably the best thing they ever told me when I started flying, and because I used to ride in the back of Hoover's 51s a lot of times when he and my dad would go to air shows, and because the Bearcat didn't have two seats, and then I'd clean his airplane and my dad's. And one of the first things they told me when we got started, even when I was cleaning airplanes, was the best thing they could ever tell me was not only know something but understand it. You know, like a child will know, you can tell him, and he'll know if he sticks his finger in the flame of a candle, it's going to burn. But you know what? He doesn't understand it till he does that. When he puts his finger in there, then he understands it. So, and I found that a lot through aviation. For an example, when I was flying a T-6, and I learned to fly in the T-6 with my instructor, Charlie Hammonds. And one day I had put in a new airspeed indicator, and I wanted to get everything just right before I had it marked, So I went up and I had the flaps and the gear down, and I'm waiting for it to stall. And I had my head in the cockpit with a little lead pencil tapping on the glass, to try and make sure that nothing was sticking and I'd have it just right. And the damn thing snapped over into a left turn spin on me. Well, it got my attention. So I had plenty of altitude. But the first thing I thought of was, God, I got to get this thing cleaned up. I had the gear and the flaps down, and it goes into a spin strictly because of my negligence, on not paying attention to having the ball centered and all that. And so I grabbed the gear handle and had that coming up, and it kept going around. And the second I put the flaps up, the damn thing stopped spinning. And I thought about it and thought about it when I talked to my dad and mentioned it to Hoover later on. He says, "You knew you were spinning. Did you understand it?" He said, "What did you do that stopped it so instantly for you?" I said, "Well, I retracted the flaps," was the last thing. They said, "And what did the flaps do?" They're like spoilers. You destroyed the lift on both wings. In the spin, you have one wing flying and one wing not flying. So if you eliminate that lift, it wanted to eliminate that rotation. And it came out. Now it got my attention. But those are the kind of things, you need to kind of watch. So always, not only know something, but understand it.
That's fascinating. I didn't really think about that, but by the
Well,
idea that
flaps are a spoiler.
yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so often I think when we're recovering from stalls or in other types of situations, we're thinking about adding lift to the wing that isn't doing something. But the idea of reducing it by cleaning up the aircraft and what effect that has, that's a really important way of looking at it.
well, you just spoil the lift. In fact, the way I used to land the BD5J was I'd come in for a landing and hold it right off the ground, and then I'd just grab the flap handle and slowly retract it and just roll it right onto the runway. So they are in effect a spoiler also.
There's a lot of folks that fly, for instance, like, Cherokees or Warriors and things that they have like just a bar for the flaps, like you mentioned. And it's interesting because you can kind of play that game on the runway of feeling what that effect is just by using that, almost as a lever in many aircraft.
Well, yeah, and particularly if you land and you're landing long, and you didn't realize you landed long. Once you get it down right down real close to the ground, you can retract those flaps, and you're going to be on the ground.
That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Speaking of that BD5J, I mean, since that is, of course, the most kind of iconic, coolest probably plane to be in any films, can you tell us some of the challenges and stories involved in flying that, and what kind of you learned about flying from the 5J?
The 5J was kind of a different airplane when I went to fly it. As I said before, Beatty invited me up to fly it, and he wanted to put together a jet team. So I hopped in the Bearcat. I lived in South Louisiana at the time, and flew up to Newton, Kansas. And all the way up there, I kept wondering, how could somebody take a stick and stick it onto the side? It didn't make any sense to me. So once I got up there and checked out in the airplane, which was very interesting because they put it up on sawhorses, and you climb in and you work the gear and the flaps and everything else, and then you go out and you do a couple of runs just holding the nose wheel off of the runway. And when you got that accomplished where you can feel all the controls, and that goes back here again, flying the T-6. One thing my dad had me do was he said, I want you to start taxiing it. Don't take off. Well, sometimes happen. But anyway, I was taxiing it. And as I got better at taxiing it, I get a little faster and so forth. But what they wanted me to feel was that in a stalled condition, not flying, you can work the ailerons. You're working the rudder. You can feel the elevator. So even after a stall, you've got certain inputs you can use, which you notice that when you go through your training, for stall recovers and so forth. But that was in fact, let me tell you a funny story. My brother, who I'm very proud of, retired from the Air Force, and was one of his last assignments was he was in charge. This is Terry Fornof. He was in charge of advanced fighter maneuvering and advanced, combat maneuvering. And he called me up one day and he said, "Oh, we're working on this new thing, and it's called PSM." I said, "PSM?" I said, "That doesn't sound very nice." He says, "Well, it's post-stall maneuvering, which the modern jet fighters do." And I told him, "I've been doing that my whole life, for certain maneuvers and everything. That's exactly what we were doing." So, you want to realize that you've got control of that airplane even after it stalls, and it's up to you to recover and get it flying again in a normal situation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But the little jet was different because you're sitting your butt in to what, maybe 1.5 feet off the ground. So you got to get used to landing real low.
And what was it like otherwise? Was it a difficult
airplane? I'll tell you what I compared it to. I compared it to kind of taking off and landing like a Bonanza, And the other thing that I found that in the air, except for the rate of roll, it reminded me of the A4 scooter. And I've seen some of your other people you interviewed talking about the scooter. And that's one of the most true airplanes I've ever flown. It's just
everyone seems to rave about the A4.
Yeah, it's a great one. I'll tell you some of the stuff I did, but we're going to talk about safety hints now. But I actually, a friend of mine, Merton Pellegrin, had arranged for me to be at the flight test center for a couple of weeks in Patuxent River. And another test pilot, Merton, was doing the test work on the F-14 at that time. And a friend of his, Pete Pierce, would take me up. And one of the first flights I had, we were in another A4, chasing an A4 single seater. And they were having trouble getting the generators were popping offline in certain maneuvers. So they were trying to find what the problem was. And I got to tell you, we go up and we're in one A4 and Pete has me flying it and we're chasing this other A4 and he says, okay, we're going to do the first series. Well, he pulls up vertically in this A4 and starts rolling it. I mean, it's got a 720 degree a second rate of roll. And we're up over 30,000 feet in the hard deck if we weren't supposed to go below 30,000 feet. And he's spinning this thing till it stops. And after it stops, it starts to slide back and then it goes forward and it flips end over end, coming down to about 30,000 feet. And I thought, holy hell. You know, I've seen a lot of wild things in airplanes, but never one tumble coming down, you know, backwards. And so I said to Pete, I said, that's something I want to try. So Pete and I, you know, we break away from that flight and we get it going and he has me pointed up and rolling it. And then when it stops, when it starts back down and flips over, I experience G's like I've never felt. Not positive G's, but G's that were trying to throw me out of the nose. You know, usually you have negative G or positive G is what you're going to experience, but not one, even doing Lumshavaks in pits and things, you don't get that kind of G. It was almost 7 G's throwing you straight forward out of the seat because you sit right up in the nose, you know? So we did that a couple of times. And then Pete says, Corkey, do you think you can do a Lumshavak in this? Well, I said, Pete, it's not my airplane and I know where the handle is to get out. So he said, okay. So we did. I pulled it up on a 45-degree angle and rolled it over and started an outside snap. And man, we went around. But here again, it was that same kind of G wanting to throw you straight forward, you know, which was, I had never experienced that in my life. And I don't know, other than a jet fighter of that type, that you could experience it in. But the thing about the A4 is all you had to do was really kind of let go of it and it just bam, you know, it was flying again.
So, Corkey, let's start with something kind of like basic for folks that are actually, you know, who maybe either rent or own their own aircraft out there. And I'm going to throw you one that's people may have heard before, but it's kind of my pet peeve, which is getting people to learn and experience the envelope of their own aircraft, the complete envelope. It seems that a lot of people can fly the same plane for maybe even a decade and stay so centered in that envelope where they're not flying anywhere near gross, or they're not flying in anything that's density altitude challenged or anything like that, that they don't necessarily know where those danger zones are until they face it unexpectedly, let's say, in some type of a situation. And I personally remember early on with a Grumman that I owned it for a while before someone came in that was extremely experienced and showed me what the plane could do with slipping and things like that. So what advice do you have for people, or what can we learn about having to do with understanding the envelope?
I would recommend that if they don't already know that envelope, they should get with somebody that's very experienced in that airplane and go explore it, because you can end up in situations that you don't expect. And one of them I'll get into later is flying blind. You know, before any airplane I've ever checked out in, you know, I did kind of a blind test. I could reach every control that I needed to reach without seeing it, you know. And 3 times in my career, I have been totally blinded. You know, while it came back, it was gone for 15, 30 seconds, but it was gone from one time in the Mustang from steam that came into the cockpit. You know, another time, some black powder that we used in making movies for make it look like the exhaust is burning black, called lamp black. A canister exploded in the airplane. It was a Beech 18, and it just filled everything where you couldn't see, and it filled our eyes and, you know, that kind of thing. So one time opening up a Coke in the Bearcat. Now, I'll tell you, don't ever do that. I used to carry, my Bearcat was really set up nice when I'd leave to go home from an air show. I had a little 6-inch television that I could watch the football game from the West Coast on Sunday afternoon. And I would always get a can of Lipton tea because it was not carbonated. And I'd put it in the airplane. And as I was going cross country and had the football game on, I'd reach down behind me, grab that can of what I thought was iced tea, and shake it up, just to mix it. You don't do that with a can of Coke at 14,500 feet. And when I opened it, I mean, it literally filled with foam in my face, everywhere. So you never know what's going to happen. You can be flying along in your Cherokee or your Cessna and going cross country and been in turbulence, and that Coca-Cola you think is safe is all shaken up. And when you
Wow.
open it, I mean, it explodes like you can't believe. So, and that would temporarily blind you. It did. I mean, it was in my eyes and sticky, and that was a miserable flight. I mean,
Wow.
everything in the cockpit was sticky,
Man,
So
I'm still trying to wrap my head around you watching television while flying a Bearcat.
well, it was one of the first little portables, and I had it wired so I could plug it into the airplane. And because I mean, I love flying, but to me, probably the most boring thing is cross country. Now I'm always doing things, cross checking the panel, um, you know, but it just made a nice trip home. But I would definitely get somebody that knows that airplane well, and on your local airport who it is.
Uh-huh.
Don't take somebody that's just trying to be a big shot. You want to get somebody that knows that airplane and go explore the envelope.
Now, when you say explore the envelope, so we're talking things like weight and balance, uh,
Well, you want to stay with that's all pretty much
inside. I'm talking
mathematics
inside
in
the
the book.
envelope. Inside the
Yeah,
envelope.
yeah. I'm talking about, I've talked with pilots that, man, they've never gone over a 45-degree bank.
Hmm.
Take it to 90 degrees. Do some stalls with somebody that, like I said, knows that airplane that really gets it braking and going.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to recover. So because you could end up there one day. I mean, we just saw on TV not 2 days ago that airliner that crashed. And I mean, I don't know what all the parameters are, but from my looking at it, I mean, he's in a steep turn, he's awful slow, and he loses the left wing drops and it spins into the ground. So you never know. I'll tell you one thing, and this was told to me by Bob Bishop, and I went up and tried it. When he was instructing, he said he would always show his students that you're not always going to get a buffet on the tail before a stall. If you're skidding that airplane in a turn, trying to cheat and kick the rudder around so you line up with the runway, and you pull on a little bit, it'll depart without you feeling a buffet.
Hmm.
So that's one of the good things. And I think a good instructor, somebody that really knows that airplane, can show you that to where you say, gee, these are things I need to watch and eliminate these stall spin accidents on final.
Yeah.
Because a lot of time when you see the footage, that's exactly what the guy's doing. He's trying to make that turn, and he's using the rudder just to try and turn it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Uh, and the other thing seems to be about when you're focused on, you're not really doing a scan, or you're focused inside the cockpit. You're not, looking at different instruments. I think many of us have experienced things where planes start to get out of rig or start or out of trim when you're really not paying attention. Any thoughts on that?
Right. Yeah, I always, when I'm in a pattern, even if it's at a controlled airport, will roll the airplane 45 degrees each way looking, to scan the area out there.
Mm-hmm.
I had that gentleman, Merton Pilgrim, I told you about. He had hired me a couple of times as a contract pilot to fly for a company that he was head of the aviation department. And one time he had me go on a flight with two of his pilots, very experienced pilots, very safe. And we were going into Jackson, Mississippi. And we're letting down. It was in a Citation 7. And I'm standing right there next to him, as we're letting down. And off to my right, because I'm looking out all the time too. I'm scared to death of a midair. and I see a Cessna 185, probably a mile or so, mile and a half. And it's obvious to me with our descent and the way he's going, would hit him or hit us. And so I kind of let it go for a few minutes. And I said, guys, I said, look off to your right over there. And he looked and he says, holy smokes. He says, there's an airplane. He says, it's not on my TCAS. Because here again, they were in the cockpit relying on that TCAS. And I said, you don't know if that's a farmer and his transponder doesn't work or it's out or he doesn't have it on or you don't know what it is. But that's why you always look out the cockpit.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense.
And particularly when you're in a pattern, roll it 45 degrees and look.
Right. Now you have been, I guess, I don't know what the word is, whether it's unfortunate. You have had a fair number of unplanned landings of engine outs. There's the FAA has a program right now talking about, the startle effect of when that happens. What advice can you give to folks about handling that situation when something happens and you've got to land?
I'll tell you the way I was taught. If the engine quits or starts acting rough, the first thing that happens is your butt cheeks get tight. You say, what is going on? Then you have to be as calm as you've ever been in your life. And you instantly trade your airspeed for altitude. You lose an engine, the only friend you have is altitude. So I don't care 172 Bearcat or jet. That altitude will give you more time to think. Now, as you're going up, you're trying to restart, you're switching the tank, you're putting the boost pump on, things of that nature, anything to do to try and get it started. Once you get up there and you're at the peak of your climb, you want to go to your best lift over drag. That's going to keep you in the air the longest. You try a restart, you ascertain the situation, what could have gone wrong. And at that point, if you determine there is not going to be a restart, you start securing things. Now, I would turn off the electrical system, everything else, unless you can talk to somebody that can help you. Like you're talking to a tower or another airplane that can see where you are, or know that you need help. But I secure everything. Turn off the boost pump, you turn the fuel off, and you're constantly, while all of this is going on, looking for a place you can land. I used to play this game going cross country. I know my dad did. Where could I put it if the engine quit? And that's just a good little game. And get used to determining from your altitude how long something is on the ground. Most roads, farm roads particularly, are a mile apart. So you can kind of lay that out and figure in your own mind. Now at your best L over D, you come down. Once you get close and you've determined the spot you're going to land, you want to go ahead and set up for, the imminent landing. So now from that high point also, if you determine there is not going to be a restart, I always put the prop into high pitch. That's less drag. Now that prop isn't going to stop most of the time unless you really yank the nose up. So that prop's going to keep turning and that hydraulic prop will keep working. And you can use that to help you decrease speed by, as you get down to where you're going to land, put it back into fine pitch as a drag situation. Then you want to get lined up. And depending on your landing gear, if it's a tricycle gear airplane and you don't know about the field, that it's going to be hard or it's a road or something, you put the gear down in a tricycle gear airplane because it'll absorb a lot of the energy when you touch down. If it's a conventional gear airplane, like say a Mustang, I wouldn't put the gear down because you're going on your back and then you're trapped inside. So you put it in on its belly. But as you get down there, use your flaps as you need to. Once you're down there close to the ground, because that's another way to slow down. Also, what you want to, and then you can also, once you're close and you want to put it on the ground, instead of flying a half a mile, you retract them so you put yourself on the ground.
Okay.
To slow down. Always, when you're 100 feet or so, open the door. If you're in a cockpit airplane, you open that canopy, because that's, if you do go over, you're trapped. And you
Yep.
want to open the door in a tricycle gear airplane, because chances are if it's a hard landing, you're going to bend something and the door could jam on you and
Yep.
you never get it open. So and then when it stops, get the hell out of it till you're sure nothing's going to blow up or burn, or, because you don't know what the problem was.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get about 100 feet away from the airplane, you thank God you're on the ground and watch the airplane before you go back to it. But those are just kind of the basic rules. All of those things happen in microseconds.
Yeah.
But that's the way I was trained. And I have seen some reports, and I've seen some interviews of people that survived engine out. I think the biggest mistake in every one of those cases is they never traded their airspeed for altitude.
Mm-hmm.
And but which would have, in 2 instances, would have given the guy enough to make it to the airport.
Really? Yeah. Do you remember the first time that you had to put an airplane down without an engine?
The first time was actually taking off from Moysan Airport in New Orleans. And I had just dropped my brother off to visit my mother. And I taxied out. And of course, I knew all the tower guys. And as I taxied out, they said, Corky, we've got a stretch DC-8 on about a 5-mile final. If you're ready to go, when you get to the end of the runway, we'll check, the separation. I got to the end of the runway. They said, Corky, if you can go right now, go. Because they knew the Mustang would heat up. Mine never did heat up like that, but that's what they felt. So I took the advantage of it and I took off. And I was headed toward the river. And I got about, just as I rotated in my rear view mirror, I saw the stretch 8 flaring out for landing. And I climbed up. I was probably, 400 or 500 feet. And I thought the engine was coming out the airplane. I mean, I had never seen that cowling twist like that, and, ripples down it and twisting. And so I immediately reached down and shut one mag off to see if it was one mag had gone bad. And then I went to both off and they kept running. So I only had one place I could go. I had turned to the west up the river and trying to figure out what the problem was and hopefully get it running again. And it was on the top of the Mississippi River levee. Now you have a river road that kind of follows it, and that levee snakes around. And I saw a spot up ahead. Then I estimated to be about 2,500 feet long. It had a slight bend in it. And I committed myself. That's where I was going to land. So I threw the gear down, put the flaps down, slipped it back and forth. And I know you're going to have people say, you don't do that in a 51. Well, if you taught right, there's a couple little tricks to that. Like I said, Hoover and my dad saved me. I put it down. I thank God there wasn't any ruts in it. And because this thing's only about 20 foot wide, that little road on top, and it's, it's just dirt. So got it stopped. And off to my right, there was, they have these little shotgun grocery stores, which are maybe 30 feet wide and 60 feet long. It's like out of an old house, big Coca-Cola sign on the side. So I knew I was safe. I'd go down there and get a phone because there were no cell phones. And I called my hangar, and Joe Perio, who was our assistant there, I said, Joe, I pulled the cowling. I said, I'm sure one of these mags are bad. I opened up the cover of it, and the phenolic wheels in there?
Yeah.
Mags, it had shred some of the phenolic. So what happened was it wasn't firing when it would get around to that, those blank spots. One side was firing, but also because of the tremendous twisting of the cowling, it had pulled the P lead out of the mag. So it wasn't going to stop. The only thing I could do before I landed was to shut the mixture off. So, it was a full dead stick landing. I had Joe bring the magnetos I had just taken off the week before because all the Mustang guys were raving, you got to put these Northeast mags on. They're the best in the world, in place of the ones that came on the Rolls-Royce engine. And so I changed the mag right there on top. Thank goodness, there's a little plate you pull on the bottom of the oil pan to make sure your mark is there. You set that up in the top dead center, on the number 1 cylinder. And I had all those tools. I had him bring them, set it up and said, gee, I hope it works. The buzz box said it was going to work. Got in and started it. Ran great. So I had one, I think it was Armstrong mag and one Northeast mag to get it home. And we called it up. And then a couple people that had stopped down by the river road came up, and we had to I didn't want to turn the airplane around because I'd have dragged the belly, because the levee slopes down on each side. And with a couple of driftwood parts from the river, we said, we use the old trick of setting one driftwood chalk behind one wheel and turned it around, and then the other wheel, so you turn it around in its own distance. And started it up and took off. And
you took off from a levee?
Yeah, and dropped it down over the river. Well, we weren't going to pull it apart, and I had more than enough room, and dropped it down over the river. And I didn't want to go in that river because if you've ever seen the Mississippi River, it's full of whirlpools from the big ships that run up and down to the refinery. Mm-hmm. And when I got it home, I changed the mag. Put it right.
But I can only imagine these days what would happen if you considered taking off a Mustang that you landed from a levee.
Well, the thing people don't realize that when I was flying the Mustang around in my early 20, it was 2021, and people would tell me I was too young to fly that night, and they didn't realize they had kids younger than me flying them in the war.
Yep.
So, but we changed it. The Mustang and I have had some experiences. That wasn't the first engine out I had in the Mustang. But it was, great airplane.
Do you have a count of how many times you've landed without an engine?
39.
39 times. I don't know if that means that you are exactly who you want in the cockpit, or you are absolutely not who you want in the cockpit with you. Well, at 39 times.
That would have to be the passenger's decision. I'm the worst passenger in the world. There's several people I fly with that I feel comfortable that I could get in the back and go to sleep. One of them's my buddy, Mert Pellegrin, Charlie Hammonds, Kevin LaRosa, Clay Lacey, those guys I could get in the back and go to sleep. Other than that, I'm nervous on an airliner. But it's,
I would be too if I had 39 times that an airplane has let me down.
Well, you got to realize I did a lot of the test work at Beatty when Bob Bishop and I were there. We did a lot of the test work on the airplanes and on the prop and the jet. Mm-hmm. And, those first reciprocating engines for the BD5 prop weren't the best in the world. They later got that worked out. But, but here again now, the BD5 engine out, okay, you're about 400 foot a minute rate of sink, and you're going 21 feet forward for every foot down. So if you're 1,000 feet, you can go a couple miles. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know it had that much glide to it.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's so clean. There's no weight.
What was it that caused so many accidents from people in that?
Most of them were caused. The first one I ever looked at, the FAA, happened to a guy, I think in New Jersey, and he had an engine out with the early engine. He had used an automotive sealer for the tanks, and with avgas, it came loose, and clogged his filter. And he put it down on his field. It was a long, long field. At the end of it was a barbed wire fence. And when I talked to him, he said, I didn't have any real experience in the airplane. So from the stall speeds I was getting, I added 5 knots for each of my children and 5 knots for my grandmother and 5 knots for my wife. And he floated a couple of feet off the ground all the way till he hit that barbed wire. He came out of it with no problem, The airplane is...
Were there any aerodynamic issues on that? Or was it?
I didn't. I mean, that airplane was so true. I mean, it was just a true airplane. It was like the A4. That's why I said I compared it to the A4 in the air, other than the roll rate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it had the same kind of feel. Now it is sensitive, but no more sensitive than a Pitts. And you aren't going to take a low-time pilot that wants to build one in his garage, you know, and put him in the pits.
Yep.
You know, it's the same kind of thing. You need some training.
Yeah.
And BD had a good training program. You know, we checked out 75 people before Oshkosh one year when all the magazines were saying the airplane's dangerous, it's a killer, it's this, it's that. And so we had people write in, and we had a good cross section of people. We had a decent engine then to check these people out in. They all had to go fly the trucker plane, which was a neat BD-5 attached to a truck on a boom in the front of it. And so you really got to fly it, you know, and if you could fly that, then we'd check you out in the airplane. Now, there were 3 instances here. First of all, the best pilot in the whole group was a young lady that had 35 hours or 36 hours total time when she came to us. She had just gotten her private. But every one of those 36 hours was flying a Cessna 185 in the bush backcountry of Utah. You know, she had experience. She loved it. She flew it well. And then we had one incident that happened. Thank God the guy came back alive. It was a priest. And he wanted to fly the BD-5 so bad and loved aviation. So he could never fly the trucker plane right. Well, as we're checking these people out, a guy named Frank Andrews, who was helping check these people out, it was lunchtime and I went to lunch and Frank came on. Well, the priest goes to him and he says, I'm ready to go try the BD-5. And Frank says, did you fly the trucker plane? He says, oh, yeah, yeah. And Frank didn't ask him if he passed, so he puts him in the airplane. And by the time I come back, the priest is taken off. And he gets in the air and I see it going up and down and up and down, you know, and he goes out of sight like this. And I get on the radio when Frank tells me it's a priest. I thought, oh my God, you know, we can't do this. And he started heading east. Well, I told the crew at the flight test center where we were to get my little jet out. I was going to go try and chase him down. He would never answer on the radio. Before I could get in the jet, he answered Frank on the radio. And he said, I'm sorry, I've been a little busy here. So I got on the radio and we talked him back to the airport and he made a decent landing. But that was it, you know. So, you know, those kind of things happen. But it's
Wow.
it's very sensitive from the standpoint. Now, I didn't find it sensitive, but I think pilots, unless you've flown something like a Pitts, would find it a little sensitive.
Yep. Let's talk flight controls for a minute. You've had some flight control challenges in your time. One of them, I believe, was a Viking. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I had the Viking in Homa flying an air show. There was a local air show, and they wanted me to come fly in it. And at that time, my Bearcat was up north. It wasn't in Homa. And Bobby and I had, you know, we had our jet team, you know, and we had Bellanca Viking had sponsored us to fly shows in the Viking also. Bob had flown it when I first met Bob. You know, he had started flying the Bellanca Viking in an air show. So I went down there and I'm flying the show. And I did the 8-point roll and I pulled out to the right to make a turnaround. And as I pulled out and started to bank to the left, all of a sudden the damn ailerons were locked. And I thought, my God, what is this? And so you don't have an inverted system. So all I could do as it kept rolling was when it would get inverted or start to get inverted, I would push it up as far as I could and let it roll back upright while it continued its roll. And we ended up doing 5 or 6 rolls, but I kept gaining altitude. That's, you know, my main thing. And as I got up there, and it was one of the shows I didn't wear a chute. So yeah, lesson learned. So as I get up there, I'm figuring, gee, can I land this thing and maybe get it close to the ground as it's rolling and so it lands flat or cartwheels or something? No, I didn't see any chance in that. So I figured what I would do the next time I went inverted, I would push it real hard and shake the wheel. And when I did that, it came out. You know, I roll level and just use rudder and elevator like some of the early remote control airplanes to come back and land. Now, a friend of mine who was a mechanic got in there and found a little 5/16 socket. On the Bellanca Viking, you have on the ailerons, there's like a little guide with a roller in there and a ball bearing, that rolls in this guide, and it had got caught under there.
Wow. So another piece
So,
of something left from maintenance induced failure.
well, you stay calm. What are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
I said, it's not my time to go yet. I've got property here. So, you know,
I've got property here.
well, you here again, I know I had a problem. Understand it. I understood that something was jamming them, whether it was under the instrument panel, out in the, outer panel by the aileron. The only thing I could figure to do, or understanding the situation, was to put it zero gravity, well, first of all, about 2.5, 3 negative G's, and then zero gravity it. And because
Wow.
the strongest point of any airplane's at zero gravity.
Hmm.
The
That's a
worst
really
is
interesting
this.
idea of like how do you shake it to try to free something? Yeah.
Well, that was the only option I had. I mean, I knew something had to jam it. So if I did it to where it was zero gravity and could try and loosen it,
Mm-hmm.
maybe whatever it was would come out.
Yeah. Barry Schiff, your friend who's been on the show a bunch of times as well, he had a great series and a video in particular where he shows, flying and landing a Cessna without touching the yoke and using the doors and using other things to do it. Control failures can happen, and use whatever is at your disposal to get down.
That's it. That's it.
And I'm promised, his son Brian promised me some outtakes, by the way, from that
Uh-huh.
from the series that you did with him. That one of these days I'm gonna
Yeah,
get my
yeah,
hands on.
yeah. We did a bunch of stuff together. You
That's
know,
awesome. I'll show you something that I have here on my desk since you brought that up. This is completely unplanned, but I keep this as a reminder on my desk. This is a flashlight with a big gouge in it in the side that just happens to have been jammed in controls of a rental plane that my son Ben was renting
uh-huh.
at one point. He actually wasn't able to figure out what was going on and didn't notice it until it was really in flight and came around, and yeah, we found that out. So maintenance can leave some things, unfortunately, that can cause you some trouble, and then you have to go to those lengths you're talking about to
Right.
try to free something. And like you said,
Well,
I
here
like that
again,
idea of unloading the plane to try to free something.
yeah. Well, I was taught aerobatics. Hoover and my dad were big on energy conservation and zero G. You
Hmm.
can't believe the performance you can get out of zero G. Here again, no weight, no stall speed, but you can still fly. That's how Bob did a lot of the maneuvers. When I'd ride with him sometimes, I went up a couple times with him in the Shrike. And if I sat there and told an instructor what he did in the top of the Immelman, with the Shrike, they'd say, "Oh, you don't do that. That's not right." But I said, think about it and ascertain it. You can roll an airplane. And when you start to roll, first of all, you start nose high. And as it starts to come around, if you try to hold that nose up with the rudder, it's going to end up snapping and stalling on you. But if you're there and you put in a little bottom rudder and a little G on the airplane, it scoops. It just makes a nice scooping effect. And that's just one of there's lots of them in aerobatics, I could tell you. I get so upset when I go to an air show and I see aerobatic pilots, not all of them, because there's some great ones, but you'll see them do a loop and it looks like a scripted letter E, up and down. It's not round.
Uh-huh.
You watch for that. Or Mustangs. I really get upset when I see a Mustang doing a loop and the guy is cockeyed in the top of the loop. It means he's not using the rudder. And that Mustang, you live by the rudder. In fact, you live by all the trim systems on the Mustang. And once you know a Mustang, you can tell you know how to fly it when everything is second nature to you. You just reach the trim as you go through the speed range.
Wow. You're a tough customer watching an air show, huh?
Yeah. Well, there's so many things that I guess we aren't going to get to cover, but one of them was formation, which to me is the most dangerous thing you can do unless you're properly taught.
Yep.
When I learned formation, the first thing we did was my dad got 2 bicycles and we went out on a ramp. And he showed me rejoins, how to use your energy going out and coming back in for rejoins instead of just trying to use a throttle, to jockey into position and things like that. He put me behind his Bearcat, and I was in the Mustang, and he said, now I want you to go about half rudder, just so you can see how fast things can happen. And when you're in trail and you put that rudder in, you're gone. Just to show you when you get in close, how precise you really have to be. I've gone to a number of these seminars or talked to guys that have gone through, the formation training. And the thing that surprised me the most when I've asked them after they've come out of them, because I didn't attend the formation meeting, but when they come out and they were friends of mine, I say, now, have they ever taught you the golden rule formation? And they said, no, what's that? I said, well, first of all, airplanes slide apart. They don't pull or push apart. If you ever touch another airplane, it's rudder out only, because you're asking for trouble if you pull or push.
Yep, that makes sense. Definitely.
And the surprising thing is, they said, nobody ever said that.
Wow.
Said, gee, somebody should.
Yeah. Hey, I want to make sure that we get to it in time. There's a thing that you've talked about that I absolutely love, and it's the idea of understanding airflow, whether it be around mountains and mountain waves or valleys,
Right.
all of that. And you told me about looking at, and whether it was that you took your students or other people, about looking at streams, like going, just like you said with your dad taking you with bicycles and practicing it that way. The idea that you can go and look at a stream or a river up close and learn what you need to know about that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, if every student or pilot remembers, somewhere in his training, some instructor or ground instructor said, you're flying in an ocean of air. Now, water and air act very similar. If you go to a stream at Yellowstone or any stream that has a lot of rocks in it, you can sit there and watch the water flow over the top of some of those smaller rocks and boulders. And it'll actually have a vacuum behind it because the wave comes up and goes over it, So there's like an air bubble. And if you look down toward the bottom of it, you'll see the water speed up, particularly if there's like leaves or something in the stream. As it comes to where it's pinched between 2 rocks, you'll see how fast that water speeds up and carries that leaf through the rocks. So, that was a very good lesson to understand, flying in the mountains. Now, as I told you before, on this one particular movie, not Heaven's Prisoners, Desperate Hours, I had to catch a Porsche as it came out of a mountain that really wound around and was going through a gap that was 30 feet wide. Now, I was flying a Piper Aerostar, and there was no way I could go through it level. So I had to make my plan. So I dived in and went, about a 45-degree angle. And the thing was to time it so I was right over the Porsche as it came out into this valley. So I had several of the stunt guys, I said, as we were prepping for this, because nothing happens instantly. I said, guys, we've been running about a 10-knot wind out of the west. I said, if you would, I need you to drive down that road. And I gave them on the map several checkpoints. And just tell me what you're reading. I'll fly over, about 100, 200 feet. Well, it was about 10, 15 knots where I was, coming right down the valley and the rocks. And they had the wind meters that they use, for these things for their stunts. And some of them recorded 30 and 35 knots when it was pinched through the rocks. So my advice to pilots is you really need to be careful flying in canyons and between rock formations. While it looks like there's nothing there, unless you're in a machine that you can climb out 6,000 foot a minute, you could get blown right into the rocks. And, you know, so there's a big difference in the way you plan things and what you're going to do. And density altitude is, I have had several examples I wanted to go through with you on that, and mountain waves. You know, I think my first experience as a student pilot, I was flying one of my first cross countries. My dad and Hoover were at a show in North Island, San Diego. And I flew the SNJ from South Louisiana out to San Diego. One of my landings was at Yuma, Arizona. As I approached, the controllers tell me, you know, beware, it's 118 degrees. We're shutting the airliners down. I never realized they shut the, but they had something to do with the EPRs and so forth and on the early jets. So I come into land and I'm figuring, well, I'm going to fall out the sky, you know, with density, altitude and everything. That damn airplane must have floated 5,000 feet. Because as I got down close to touching down, the heat waves were so bad coming off this black asphalt runway that they were creating a thermal.
Wow.
And the airplane, I finally had to stand it up on the gear to get it to land, you know, because it's going to keep you in the air. I mean, it's nothing but a big thermal right over that runway. Now, when I went to take off, man, it took me a long ways to get airborne. And I figured with all those thermals, I'd just jump in the air. But that wasn't the case. So, you know, density altitude has many different forms.
That's fascinating. It never occurred to me that, I mean, yeah, I would have thought, you know, you'd be at a higher ground speed, you'd take up a lot of runway, but just out of the speed that you were doing. But I would never have thought about what we see, of course, the thermal of heating that and all the air rising off the pavement.
And you get out and you get, particularly on a black asphalt runway in the Southwest, when it's 118 degrees, you can imagine what the temperature was. In fact, I'll tell you how hot it was. When I fueled up before I got out of the cockpit, the line boy ran up with a couple pieces of carpet. And it had started to melt the bottom of my tennis shoes. That's how hot it was, you know. So, you know, these are, you know, just some of the things you got to realize with density altitude. It's not only taking off. Sometimes, depending on the landing surface, we were at an air show in Corpus Christi, and the Golden Knights had a little guy they called the Indian. And great guy. He couldn't have weighed, it didn't look like he weighed 100 pounds. He jumped, and he was over the ramp at the air show. Nobody thought he'd ever come down. And he kept turning and staying over it. And I bet you when he touched down, he wasn't coming down a mile an hour. You know, so you got to be, it's, you know, it's not only that the air is thinner, sometimes that heat's going to cause a lot of, you know, thermals.
Anything else having to do with density, altitude that you think about?
Well, we can talk about it in another show if you want to, but the personal experience making the movie, The Getaway, we had to work in a very close, short area. I had to come over a building. This was actually shot in a horseshoe-shaped ring of cat houses in Mexico. And that was part of the story, Alec Baldwin, Kim Basinger movie. And I had to come over this thing and drop down and land, and I only had about 1,300 feet from the end of this building to this telephone wires that were going across. So Charlie Hammond's taught me this trick flying seaplanes. You learn from everybody. I mean, nobody knows it all, but if you get exposed to all of it, you can use all the little tricks. You know, Charlie taught me to fly seaplanes. We'd go into canals that had trees on both sides, just wide enough that the wingspan would fit. But the only way you could get into these canals, some of them were blocked off at each end that the oil companies dug in South Louisiana, was you come in with full flaps and you come down about 45 degrees. And as you go to rotate, because you don't have much speed to rotate, but when you rotate, you give it a little burp of power, just boom, you know, just boom. Just enough to break that, you know, you're ready to sink and to pull you forward a little bit and land. And that's a technique I had to use to land in this ring of cat houses.
Wow.
Now, As the day went on, we'd start shooting that at 7 in the morning. And by 10 o'clock, I said, that's it. Because I didn't have enough room to get over the wires. And I watched that distance go on the Cessna, light loaded Cessna 185, just grow at 100 feet, in a half hour. And that's the
Wow.
most rapid rate I've ever seen. But it was a perfect example of density altitude.
Wow. So last tip before, or area or topic before we have to go, the landing techniques. I know you could do a book. We could do hours just on landing techniques, but you got a
Well,
couple of tips for us?
two of them. Yeah, let me tell you, first of all, I'm going to tell you this one, and this is going to get a lot of reaction for you probably. I have checked out 3 people that were friends of mine and didn't sign any book because I'm not an instructor, but they had never flown a tail wheel. And I checked them out in the Lopresti Swift Fury. And the biggest thing, the tail wheel, is to know and understand. If you push the left rudder, you're going left. You push the right rudder, you're going right. I would have them taxi, and as we taxi, a long taxi, I'd have them increase the speed a little bit. And once they could handle all of that, they never had any problems with takeoff or landing. I said, land it like you land your 172, but make sure you're straight. Wasn't teaching them tail wheel landings at that time, but put it on the gear, make sure you're straight when you lower the tail. And this was done within a half an hour. And none of them had ever flown tail wheels before.
Wow.
So it's a taxi. If you get the taxi down and they're comfortable with the taxi and understand, they push left, they're going left. I think I told you the story with Harrison Ford.
Tell me
in
again.
Hawaii. Well, we were using the beavers over there, and they had and Harrison had about 370 hours at that time. And so they had these 2 guys that were specialists in beavers, and older gentlemen, and they weren't getting the job done with him. So Harrison came to me one day and he says, Corky, will you go fly with me? I said, sure. So we go out to the airport, and the night before I talked to these 2 guys in the bar, and I said, what's your problem? I said, I knew you guys are more than qualified to check him out. They said, well, he'll start to wander and I'll take it away. And I said, why? Well, that's Harrison Ford. If something happens, man, my reputation would be ruined if I were in an accident with Harrison Ford. So as Harrison and I go out, I have him taxiing, and then I had him taxiing a little faster, and then a little faster. And by the time we reached the end of the runway at Hului Airport in Hawaii, I said, okay, Harrison, let's go. I'm ready. He's ready. He puts the power to it. And yeah, he wandered a little bit, but you know what? He only did it about 2 or 3 wanders left and right. And then he had it nailed. And we went off and we flew. We shot a bunch of landings, and we come back and we land. And as we're taxiing in, he says, Corky, why don't you yell and scream and take the airplane away? I said, why? I said, you hadn't done anything that was beyond my capability to recover the airplane, and you were doing everything right. So why am I going to take the airplane away?
Yep.
And then he went on. I was so comfortable with him. He's such a competent pilot. And everybody thinks just because he's an actor, he isn't. Very competent pilot, very dedicated. I mean, we went over the ocean, and I had him shoot some of the scenes. I had to be in the airplane with him, by insurance and everything. But I told him, give me 10 feet over the ocean, which is dangerous. But I was watching it, because you're looking into water, and particularly in Hawaii, you're looking 30 feet deep before you think you're seeing the water. And he just did everything right. And so I actually sat there on a number of shots. In fact, I got so comfortable with him, I had him landing on this little 1,200-foot runway they made for us for the movie. And, it worked out great. We've been great friends ever since.
Awesome. Well, when it comes time for us to get this Mustang behind me in the air, I'm going to get some tips from you, my friend. We'll
okay.
See if you can.
Well, I was going to give you the best. Going to give you the best tip. You got time?
Yes, sir.
That's the best tip. And I have told this to many instructors who have come back and thanked me. And here again, it's know the situation and understand it. When you come into land, don't pull all the power off. Okay? When you come into land, there's a sweet spot, just like a seaplane when you put it on the step. You can feel it, whether it's pulling or drag. You know, your butt will tell you whether the prop is pulling you or it's drag. Find that sweet spot where it's not pulling and it's not drag, and that airplane will land itself.
Wow. I
You
have
know,
not thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense.
now I won some money on two different bets. I was using a Beech 18. In fact, the one I told you I got blinded by the black powder. And this guy, high time Beech 18 pilot hauling cargo. And we're coming into land one day and he says, you know, you can't 3-point the Beech 18. I said, why? He says, well, you just can't. The tail will fall out. I said, watch. So I came in and I used that technique, made a perfect 3-wheel land. And he said, how the hell did you do that? I said, when you pull all the power, you're disturbing all the air that gets to the tail. You got drag on the prop. That prop's becoming an air brake. If you keep a little bit of air flowing over it, the airplane's going to fly and land. You know, so we went out and I showed him, and and you can feel it where it's not thrust and it's not drag. I did it with a Bristol B170, which is bigger than a DC-3, in a movie in New Zealand, and I did a double engine out landing with that airplane for the movie. I didn't lose an engine. But this guy told me the same thing with this Bristol. Well, you can't 3-point this airplane because the tail falls out. So we weren't going into Queensland or Queenstown, New Zealand, and I said, watch. The same thing. He says, how the hell did you do that? And he flew him in the military. And once I showed him and he went up and did it, he says, I can't believe it. So it's no, but understand what's happening.
No,
You
but
know?
understand. That makes so much sense. And that you've blown my mind again, Corkey. I love it.
Well, I hope they learn something, particularly be safe. Safety is paramount. Like I said, I've never done a stunt where I said, here, hold my beer and watch this. Doesn't happen.
Right. Well, that's absolutely fantastic. I hope you'll come back on the show because we have so much more to talk about.
Well, that's up to you. You're the captain.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. And you have a good night.
You too, Jeff.
All right. Take care. And to all of you, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us here on SocialFlight Live. We'll be back next Tuesday on January 24th with AOPA President Mark Baker. Going to be a wonderful evening about learning what is new at AOPA and all of the great work that they are doing to support and protect our rights to fly. On Tuesday, January 31st, if you've ever seen the show Fly with Bruno from both Instagram, YouTube, etc., Bruno is going to be here joining us. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy with such warm enthusiasm for general aviation, and I'm looking forward to having him here on the show as well. And then on Tuesday, February 7th, the incomparable Rod Machado will be here for a humorous and educational evening, talking about so many different topics that Rod is known for. He's a great instructor, a wonderful human being, and of course he is funny to boot. It's just going to be a lot of fun. Until next time, I'm Jeff Simon for SocialFlight. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you all blue skies.